Well, I'm trained as an organic chemist, and so synthetic organic chemist, building molecules, both natural products, but mainly trained to do methodology, come up with new methods to build molecules. My own research has moved in that direction, partially. We build molecules that will act as little molecular machines, drill into cells to kill them or to treat them. And then we have a whole area of materials, new materials, high-performance materials that we make. And then we have another area where we work on energy and building new materials for that. And then also electronics, electronic memory we've built.
Okay. Wow. Sounds like a lot. What's some of the most exciting advancements or things that are happening in your field today?
In my field or in my lab?
Either.
Okay, so in my lab, the most exciting, it's a little bit hard. It's like saying, which one of your 4 children do you love the most?
Get that.
But so these nanomachines, one of my students, Cicerone Ayala Orozco, developed these molecular jackhammers that can really pound into cells, and that's going very well.
Wow.
Another one of my students, Zvi Long, he came up with a new method to make graphene, which is single atomic sheets of graphite, very strong material. And that has been able to scale very well. And so we started a company, and they're up over a ton a day in the fabrication of that material. We have a battery company that's really taken off and doing very well. We're separating a lot of metals from electronic waste, and that company's doing very well. And so we've been able to transition many of these advancements, and it's always exciting to see.
Wow. In addition to all of that, you also find yourself diving into cultural conversations that are often somewhat controversial. And most recently, You've been in the spotlight around origin of life questions, and I'm just curious why you would leverage your public platform for that particular area of science, of everything out there is to talk about. Why that topic?
It was really not by choice. I just fell into it, and I was at a seminar overseas, and I saw somebody give a talk on carbohydrates and the complexity of carbohydrates that are on every cell surface. And I stepped outside, and a friend of mine was there, David Berlinski, and I was saying, I just don't understand how these things could have come about all by themselves. I had never studied origin of life. And he says, Jim, why don't you write an article and put it in the journal Inference? And I said, because he was working with the journal at the time, and I said, okay, maybe I'll pull something together. And so I started researching this. What are the ways that people have proposed that life came about? And as an organic chemist, so origin of life is before biology, before evolution could have taken hold, before any biology. It's strictly organic chemistry. And so as I started looking into this, I started asking my colleagues, is there anything here? And they'd send me a couple of papers on it, and I'd ask them, how did these things come about? They say, well, it's supposed this reaction, this reaction. So I started studying this, and I thought, this is nonsense. This is not true. It could not have happened this way. And so I wrote an article for the journal Inference, and then the world exploded.
Really?
Yeah. So those who work in the area were very upset, and they started contesting with me, and I got a lot of very upset people saying, I'm a religious fanatic, and that's why I wrote it. This had nothing to do with my faith. This is just looking at the science. So I wrote another article and another one, and I started putting it out there, and then I started, it was actually during COVID that because I had given a talk on origin of life, and then I was kind of slammed by other people on the internet, and so during COVID I couldn't travel, so I started making videos on this and started posting them up there. First just with friends of mine doing the editing and things like that, and it just exploded from there. So it's not like I wanted this fight. In fact, I was blissfully unaware that if I just publish a scientific paper that things could explode around me.
Yeah. As a scientist committed to your craft and your discipline, did it bother you what you saw, or maybe what you didn't see in terms of the research going on?
Oh yeah. It bothered me because I knew all it was showing is that life could not have formed that way for multiple reasons. And I'd point these things out, and nobody would contest with me on the science. They'd never say, no. You've got the science wrong. If they did that, I'd have been very happy, because that's the way science normally moves.
Right.
You propose something, and people push back on it, and they show you the rationale, the scientific rationale. But none of what was coming back at me was science. There was no science in this.
So what was it? If it wasn't science, what did you see? Is it?
It was accusations that this is a religious guy trying to say that God are the gaps. And I said, I never mentioned God. I never said because we don't know, therefore God. And so I was being accused of things that I never said. But in science, if nobody pushes back with science, it was ad hominem attack, and then they would double down and say that their results are sound. They would say things like, most of the paradoxes on origin of life have already been solved. And I'm like 0 of them have been solved. None of them. Tell me, what do you think that is solved here? And they would never give me an answer.
Yeah.
They would just go on another YouTube channel and say it again, or make comments about me. And so then I knew that there's some other agenda here that these guys must have, because for 40 years they've been working on their careers and trying to advance this and making many, many claims, which they'll make a claim in their papers that goes way beyond what their data showed.
Yeah.
And then the press takes it from there and ramps it up much more. And then that gets into textbooks. So that the textbooks, you look at origin of life in textbooks, it can't have happened that way.
Mm-hmm. But it's in textbooks being taught like it happened. And if, like they say, if a lie gets told enough times by the right people, then it becomes the truth in people's minds. And
I've heard that.
I can understand that's probably what bothered you the most. I mean, not even as a theologian, as a scientist, like that's just bad science.
It was just bad science. And then I had other people coming up to me saying, I agree with you. I agree with you. You got this right.
Behind the scenes?
Oh, yeah. But don't use my name, because they didn't want to go through what I was going through. I had several colleagues at Rice, synthetic chemist colleagues, tell me that they agree with me. I had several people over the internet contact me and say, but, I don't want to be known for this. And because any chemist sees, everybody sees what I see. And I've even said to the guys in Origin of Life, I said, you see exactly what I see. And they won't contest with that.
Yeah.
They'll just stay quiet.
It's too much of a threat to their narrative.
But I can understand that. If you have for 30 or 40 years worked in an area and made all sorts of claims, and then somebody says, the emperor has no clothes, you don't want to end your career like that.
Right. I can understand it too, but it's also very scary. As a layman, to think about the scientific community wielding such power.
But COVID opened things up.
How so?
COVID exposed all of this. Even for me. I mean, I wasn't an anti-vaxxer. I trusted these things. And then you start finding out there's something wrong here. You told us, don't even bother wearing a mask. Okay, well, it's not going to. And then, no, wear a mask. Wear 2 masks. Science is not like this.
Yeah.
Real science is not like this. And then you start, as a scientist, you start looking at this virus and the structure of this thing and how you have multiple cationic centers next to each other. Nature doesn't do this. I mean, this thing was made to bind to humans.
Yeah.
And this was interesting.
It was engineered, right? So, and if you said that, you were there was a time when you were a bigot or canceled for saying that.
Yeah, and then these things start coming out, and it don't say it was ever engineered. I mean, this came from a bat in a market.
Yeah.
And when all of science starts falling apart around you, scientists used to have a lot of street cred. All you had to do was say, scientists say, and everybody would give attention. Okay, now as scientists say, it's like, therefore I don't believe you at all.
Yeah.
And justifiably so.
Sure.
Because I've seen it with Origin of Life, and then I lived through it with COVID. And now I'm far more circumspect when I hear something.
Right. Generally, what do you attribute this phenomenon to? If you see it across disciplines, you see it in Origin of Life, you see it in COVID, there's plenty of other examples, I'm sure, from different fields of science, where some other pressure is applied to what's being discovered, and unscientific facts are being injected into scientific findings to fit a narrative. What's the force there? Is it simply greed? Is it there's a anti-faith secularist strain in our society? What do you attribute that to?
There's a word that, as a pastor, you might have heard of: sin.
The biggest word in the human language. Yeah, I've heard that word. Yeah.
Yeah, and people thought scientists were somehow different, but we're no different. We want to allay our fears. We want to look good to other people. We're just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And sin creeps in, and I saw this with Origin of Life. There was this mindset, and you couldn't argue against it, or else somehow you're attacked. And this is not good.
Right.
And I was living this now with Origin of Life, and now I'm seeing this with COVID as well.
Yeah.
And the attacks that come from people that really know almost nothing about chemistry are contesting with me, and I'll point something out to them, and they say, no. And it's like, have you ever taken a course on this? You don't understand anything.
Right.
You don't understand anything. And you're making these claims, you're parroting what other people have said, but it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then the community is not standing behind me. They're not coming forward because they're afraid the same things, the criticisms that I'm getting, are going to come at them. And I understand. Look, I never studied Origin of Life. I didn't care. And then when I started studying this is where it was all exposed. Scientists are very busy. You get 300 emails a day you got to address, and then you got to write for grant money. You go hat in hand all over begging for money to keep your program funded. And then once you get funding, you have to maintain it because you've built a group up to that level, so you have to now maintain that.
Sure.
It's a lot of work.
Yep.
And the last thing you need is to have the community against you for something that has nothing to do with the particular field that you're studying. So why go ahead and stand behind Jim Tour publicly? Why do that? Mm-hmm. There's a professor from Princeton who's just retired. And now that he's retired, he says, hey, let's write a paper together on this.
Because he's got his pension, he's set. Yeah. Oh, man, I'm laughing, but I'm also crying on the inside. And I just think it's important to point out for anybody watching and listening right now, I think there is, an unspoken belief that you have delved into this topic of Origin of Life because of your Christian worldview, and you want to prove something is right about Christianity or about the Bible. That flies in the face of the science in this case. But I think there's more to it than that for you. And forgive me if I'm reading too much into it. I see incredible value in just fighting for the purity of science itself. And science in our culture is like an institution that is one of the underpinnings of our well-being. It's just like the family or like the church or the government. Like, we need these things to be of integrity. And once the integrity of your institutions comes into question, I mean, that's a slow, steady descent for our civilization, I think. If people stop trusting what the scientists say, where does that leave us? And so I think, religion aside, this is a topic that's worth fighting for just because of what you saw when you looked in. Let's talk about that. What you saw when you looked into the research, without getting too deep into the weeds and losing everybody who doesn't know the big words, what did you see was missing in the scientists' explanations of the origins of life and the assertions they were making?
What I saw was everything was messed up. When you look at these molecules, so there's 4 classes of compounds. that we're built out of. 4 main classes of compounds. You have the carbohydrates, which are the sugars, polysaccharides. That's what they're called. It can be called polysaccharides, sugars,
Sure.
or carbohydrates. You have the proteins, which are made up of amino acids. You have the nucleotides, which is the RNA and the DNA. So you take the nucleotides, you hook them together, you get the RNA and the DNA. Then you have the lipids, which are the things that surround the cell membranes and heavily concentrated in fats as well. So you have to have these 4 classes of compounds. And so I started looking at what are the origin of life proposals on how these were made, because it's hard to make these.
Yeah.
None of them was valid for how this would form on an early Earth. None of them was valid. So for carbohydrates, first of all, nobody knows how to make the carbohydrates. They talked about the foremost reaction. The foremost reaction, when you start looking at it, is an utter mess. It makes gazillions of, billions upon billions of structures. When you have impurities, you can't do chemistry because those impurities gum up the works.
Sure.
Biology can handle impurities. So in other words, you can take a handful of supplements and your body knows what to do with each one of those. You've mixed them all together in your stomach.
Yeah.
And biology has enzymes that select these out. Chemistry does not have this. And an OH group on this molecule will compete with the OH group on that molecule that you want to couple. It doesn't know the difference. And so the foremost reaction would be invalid. It couldn't work. And people who've used the foremost reaction, they say, hey, we can see a little bit of it in there because we have instruments that can detect to a very fine level.
Okay.
But you could never use that. And so then they would buy that from a chemical manufacturer and use it in pure form. I said, that's cheating. You'd never be able to do that on an early Earth.
Yeah.
So then you have to take those carbohydrates and hook them together. That's the polymerization problem. The polymerizations are unfavored. There's something called the free energy, and the free energy is positive. It means it's unfavored. It wants to go back to starting material. The free energy was positive. Then it was the ability to hook these up. You get trillions of different arrangements you can get, but biology uses just one.
Okay.
How did it select that thing out? There were no enzymes around. So that didn't work. Then you go to the next class of compounds, the same problems, the proteins from the amino acids. First of all, the amino acids, nature uses 20 amino acids. But if you just randomly make amino acids, say in a Miller-Urey experiment, you get thousands of amino acids. How do you just get the 20 you want? Won't these other ones compete? And they just go with alpha amino acids. What about the beta and the gamma amino acids? How come those aren't competing? Because those form too. And then you the whole element of chirality, meaning that everything in nature has a handedness. You have a left hand and a right hand. It just chooses one, not the other. And with the carbohydrates, it just chooses one. With the amino acids, it just chooses another. And so nobody knew how that was forming properly. Then you have to hook the amino acids together to get the protein. Free energy is positive. It doesn't want to do this.
Right.
The way nature does this is it has catalysts that drive this thing and pull the water away from this. When you're in an aqueous system, it goes the other way. So nobody solved it. They have these extra things hanging off that would compete, that stop the polymerization. So you can't make the amino acids. Okay, so let's look at the nucleotides. Maybe life started with the nucleotides. You get to the whole RNA hypothesis of life. Same problem. To make a nucleotide, you first have to make a sugar. But remember, we couldn't solve the sugar problem.
Right.
Then you have to hook a base onto it, and then you have to polymerize these. Guess what? Free energy is positive. It doesn't want to polymerize. And you get the wrong assignment because you have this free hydroxyl group. And then the stability, even if you had RNA, it would want to go back the other way. It wouldn't want to stay there. It decomposes very quickly. And then every time you polymerize RNA, every time you polymerize a protein, every time you polymerize a sugar, there's a code there. There's code embedded. It's like taking letters and randomly hooking them together. It'd be unintelligible. That's what these are.
Okay.
They're unintelligible. Nature has a code. It has to be a prescribed code. Just a box of letters is no good.
Yeah.
Just sticking the letters together randomly is no good. And so you have to have these in a certain way. That's the code. Nobody knows where the code came from. They say, well, one formed randomly. Okay, if one molecule formed randomly, the chances are less than 1 in 10 to the 40th. Once you're less than 1 in 10 to the 40th, the universe does not have enough time to do this. Even if you give the universe 14 billion years, there's not enough time to solve something in 1 in 10 to... But let's just say one happened to form.
Yeah.
It would decompose very quickly. It would decompose within minutes if it's RNA. It would decompose within a couple of days, or probably hours. It would racemize if it were a protein.
It would have to survive a long time.
It would have to survive, yeah. But people say, well, it had a long time. No, time is actually your enemy, because once this thing forms, it's going to decompose very rapidly. And then once it forms, it has to find all the substrates that it can work on. But those substrates could not have been there when it was forming, or else they would have gummed up the works. So all of a sudden it formed, and now it got away from all the other ones, and it found all the substrates it needs to act upon. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And then you can do it with, there's one more class of compounds. You want to cut me off here, but I'm telling you, you still got to deal with the lipids.
Please.
People thought that lipids were easy. No, it's not easy. You have to. The two ends of a glycerol are enantiotopic, which means you have to selectively take one and not the other. And then you often have double bonds in there that you wouldn't know how to arrange. You often have hydroxyl groups that you got to orient. So the lipids are also hard. So all 4 classes you cannot make using a prebiotic method. How are you going to even get started? You can't make the code. And then here's the other thing. Even we can take a cell. We can take a cell today. We can deconstruct it and put all the different components in bottles. So you already have the code there, because I'm giving you the polymers. Now I say, just put it back together. Put Humpty Dumpty back together. Can you do that in your modern laboratory with all the modern techniques that you have? Can you do that? Nobody can do that. We don't even know how to go about doing it. We don't even know how to put the things back together again. You have to construct at least 15 different large particular pieces and then have them assembled together and try to do that. Nobody knows how to even do that. So even if you had all the pieces, how would an early Earth under a rock in a tidal pool, how would they come together? Then you got the concentration effects, you have the racemization effects, so many things on top of that. Any one of these stops life. And there are thousands of these problems, thousands.
So your point is that it's not just statistically unlikely, it's impossible.
It's impossible. It's impossible. And statistics shows you impossibility. Once you head up to a certain number, and it doesn't have to be infinity, just a number, 1 in 10 to the 40th, the number of combinations of just protein-protein non-covalent interactions in a single yeast cell, which is a very simple cell, is the number of interactions possible is 10 to the 79 billion. 10 to the 79 billion is a 1 with 79 billion zeros after it. The number of elemental particles is 10 to the 90, 1 with 90 after it, 90 zeros. This is 1 with 79 billion zeros. The number of elemental particles in the universe is 10 to the 90, 1 with 90. Zeros after it. So that becomes a statistical impossibility.
Yeah. So
we can say impossible. Now, you would think that these folks that work in the area of origin of life, you would think that they've got answers to this. Guess what? Crickets. They don't, because I've posed these problems to them. And if you're in a room with them, they'll just sit there and stare at you. If you're not in a room with them, they'll just criticize you. They say, well, Tour's using God of the gaps. When people will not engage you, no answer is an answer in itself.
Yeah.
When there is no answer. So you're bursting to ask me some questions. Go ahead.
I have so many. I don't know where to start, but it seems like generally the ones accusing you of God of the gaps are doing the same thing, like without God, I guess, but with some finding.
Yes, time of the gaps. If we had enough time.
Time of the gaps.
Time of the gaps.
That's what the argument is?
Yes. If we had enough time, these things would come together, and that's a time of the gaps argument. But these people who work in the area, not the low-level people that send me
Sure.
nasty emails, but the people that work in the area, they see exactly what I see. So they don't send me emails criticizing me.
Yeah.
They'll never pick out and say, well, Tura said this, that's wrong. I did a 9-part series. It's 10 hours, 14 hours of teachings on this. You would think that if I got something wrong, they would jump all over it.
Yeah.
Nothing. Crickets.
What kinds of claims do they make based on this once upon a time theory of theirs? Like what headlines were they making about their findings?
That we've solved most of the paradoxes in origin of life, that we're able to make the RNA, and once the RNA could form, then we could make proteins, and the enzymes would then do the assembly. None of this is true. None of this. And even if you had all the pieces, I'll give you all the pieces. How would it come together? And then when that was asked to Stephen Benner, who has come with a lot of grand claims, I was in a seminar when he was asked, okay, if you have all the components of a cell, why don't you just put it together if you can make all these things? You know what he said? He said, well, a career is about 80 years. I'm 3.5 scores into this. I'll leave this part for the other guys. Why be so dishonest?
Yeah.
Why not just say you would have no idea how to do it?
Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Because when confronted, they'll just wiggle with some silly little comment. I have never heard such an explanation in any other area of science.
Yeah.
But somehow in this area of science, these great chemists, like Stephen Benner, think that this is somehow acceptable? It's unacceptable.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to me that it's religious. That's what it feels like, is that there's a religious movement going on in this field of science that wants to, for whatever reasons, my gut instinct is that they want to counter the theist narrative, the Christian narrative, Judeo-Christian narrative of a creator, which raises questions about even if they could do all of this in a lab. For me, help me if I'm wrong, but even if they could create what you're talking about in a lab, they still would have created it. Am I missing something?
No, you're not missing. First of all, they can't make life. Nobody's ever made life. But even if they could, it doesn't explain how it happened on an early Earth. They're what's called prebiotically relevant experiments.
Yeah.
You would have to show that each one of those things that you did in your lab with modern experimentation that could have been done when there were no instruments around, when there were no other, weren't these large chemicals around. So not only can they not do it with all of their expertise, they can't do it in an origin of life, which is a much harder scenario. So nobody, you make proposals. You don't have to show those proposals, and then you make proposals and then you try to show it. But I've asked them, what is just your proposal? I'm not asking you to do, just take me through the sequence of things on how life could have originated. What's your proposal on how these molecules could have come together, on how this would have happened on an early Earth? You know what they say? Crickets.
Wow.
Nothing. So you were getting at something else. You were saying, this sounds religious, and it does sound religious. What happens when people attack your religion and you don't have an answer? Well, what happens all over the world, and we've seen this throughout human history, you kill them.
Yeah.
There's wars over this stuff. Don't pick on my religion. And this is why in Christianity we're trying to come with trained apologists so we can give an answer that we don't have to say, well, you're picking on me too. No, we come with answers.
Right.
Because answers are hard. It's much easier to just become violent.
Sure.
And punch the guy in the face because he said something about my religion that I couldn't answer.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer questions. And what people traditionally have done with religion, they've killed over this stuff.
Sure.
And this is what you see. This has become like a religion where they want to go after the individual rather than after the science. Become a scientific apologist. Become the one who gives an answer based on science. Just do that. You do that with every other field.
Sure.
Why not do it with this field?
One of my favorite things you've done publicly is you're laying down the gauntlet in a YouTube video a little over a year ago where you called out Dr. Benner and others in the field by name, 10 of them, and you said if any of them could offer a satisfactory answer to any of the big 5 questions.
These aren't just big 5. These are easy 5.
Yeah.
Easy 5, not big 5.
Or origin of life questions, that you would delete all your videos on the topic and you would go away.
And never talk about it again publicly.
So first of all, this is completely idiotic. Nucleotide polymerization has been demonstrated on Montmorillonite clay for decades.
Yes, with 30 to 70% 2-5. I asked you for 3-5, which is what you need to have life.
What happened?
None of them contacted me. None of them had an answer.